this morning, and I tell you, I've enjoyed these lessons. I don't know about you guys, but, you know, have you liked these lessons? I think they're interesting. The subject is really interesting to me. I'd like to say, just to take a few minutes and say a few words about, still about the lesson when I was here last time.
They can restrict the movements and the actions of people, but they can't change the heart.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Go ahead.
And that is why Christ never involved himself in politics when he was here, because it said that he knew that it was an individual change that needed to take place in the person's heart. So, you can't legislate a change of mind or heart.
There's a mic right in front of you, right there.
Yeah, you can't legislate. A change in somebody's thinking.
Yeah.
So.
And isn't that mainly what Christ is interested in, isn't it? It's the heart, the mind. I mean, not behavior so much, because what's in our hearts and our minds, I mean, that comes before the behavior, right? Remember, as a person thinks in their heart, so are they. Proverbs,
That's what it says.
Yeah. Connie, I was going to say, there's a mic right up here, right beside me, if you'd like. Oh, you got one. Good. Okay.
Well, Harry, I saw a really interesting thing on, it's more of a worldly perspective, but it was about experiments they did called 2 Rats in a Cage.
Yeah.
And it kind of illustrates why that these issues, whether it be racism or whatever, but divides exist. And the experiment, basically, they put a rat in a cage and started giving it electroshocks.
Yeah.
Made it miserable, gave it stress. But by itself in the cage, eventually it acclimated as though this is the new normal, got back to eating. Of course, it was miserable, but it went on, behavior-wise, almost like normal. They put 2 rats in the cage. Same environment, same random shocks, all this stuff. Well, they don't acclimate. As the stress level builds, at the same, outside, stress, they turn on each other. They start blaming each other for the stress that they're under until the point they start fighting, and they normally fight to the death. And they said, basically, this whole world, we're all 2 rats in a cage. We're blaming each other for the misery that we feel, where it's Satan pushing the buttons that cause it, but we end up blaming each other when we are not the cause for each other's misery.
And it's most likely that Satan is
it's whoever's pushing the button, which is Satan.
Satan has inspired somebody else to do it to us in the first place.
Right. And so it's an interesting social experiment, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. No matter what the social or political divide is, that's not the root problem. The root problem is people are unhappy, they're miserable because of what Satan's done to them, and he gets them to turn on each other. And you look back, it's like, oh, that's Cain and Abel, right?
Sure.
Kinda Adam and Eve, when they first sinned, when they first started pointing fingers.
Sure.
I think Satan was there kind of prodding them to do it. But Cain and Abel's the strongest first example, where they turn on each other and he kills him.
Yeah, see, and this is so important because, I mean, what you're talking about, this is exactly what CRT uses, like what Connie brought up last week, to destroy the morale in the military because it causes discord amongst the soldiers or the seamen or whoever, Marines, And how can they depend on each other if they don't like each other and there's discord amongst them?
Well, I mean, if it worked for Cain and Abel, the first 2 and the only 2 that were really there, why wouldn't Satan use that exact same stress button pushing thing against everyone in all time? It's very effective, not just with animals, but with humans. I mean, we see it everywhere, every day. You turn on the news is nothing more than mostly people basically blaming someone else for the problems going on.
Yeah, and see,
and realistically, they're probably not on opposite sides. They probably want the same solution, but they can't see that because they're focused. You're the cause of my problem.
Yeah, see, and this can destroy society, like what you're talking about, but it can also destroy the church.
But
if it's allowed to go.
But isn't that the end kind of what we believe in prophecy is going to happen. You're going to have two divides in the end, and one turning against the other, blaming them for the cause of their misery.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the same thing.
It basically boils down to the me mentality.
Speak up just a little bit.
Yeah.
It basically boils down to the me mentality. It's not that it's us, it's the me. I'm protecting me. It's a selfishness, and it's where self comes in.
Okay, so-
And that's what it was with Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
Cain, it was me. It wasn't about Abel. It was about me, and that's what the whole thing is about. It's me,
Yep.
and that's the whole thing about Satan and everything else. And it's what the world is. You know, you've got I can't think of the name right now. Do What Thou Wilt, guy, Antoine, whatever. That's what's going through the world now. Is do what thou wilt. So you're not responsible. You can do whatever you want.
Well, and see, this is how all the stuff we're living through today is kind of setting it up to be worse, because the more that people are isolated from each other through all that's going on, the more the me
Yeah.
sinks in even deeper.
Yeah. John, were you going to say something? Yeah.
So what is the remedy?
Yeah. Well, see, that's a good point. That's where we need to come to, right?
Well,
See,
it
what's
comes
the
down
remedy?
to, and I know you're getting at it, you look at Jesus, and you no longer have the two rats blaming each other because you're equal as a problem, causing suffering to him.
Well, I mean, because since what we've talked about this, since it is a heart problem and not behavior, does that mean that we can't do anything with racist laws, or should we just let them go?
Well, it depends on what your purpose is. If your purpose is to reduce violence and bring some harmony in society, then yes, we have to have them.
No,
If-
what I'm talking
if
about.
the purpose is to change the hearts, then the laws are really not going to do anything.
But still, even though your purpose is to change the heart, don't we still need to do away with any racist laws that are out there?
Yeah, racist.
Yeah.
I see. I'm talking about trying to
Yeah.
laws that would prevent racism. Is what I was thinking that, not the
Yeah,
other way
yeah.
around.
Yeah.
But absolutely, anything that basically, goes against our, moral standings, that when it comes to like murder and theft and racism, anything that's an attack on someone else, we absolutely need laws, because there will be people that will violate that.
Yeah.
And you cannot change their hearts, but you can reduce the consequences of their decisions and remove them from society if need be, to protect others.
Well, sure. We'll see. And that's a good point, something I was going to bring up, because where you have godless people, you're always going to have trouble like this. People that sow discord so they can make themselves more powerful. They make themselves more powerful by making more discord amongst people, Divide and conquer, heard that kind of thing. I mean, can you think of a historical example of institutionalized racism?
World War II.
Yeah, Nazis, right?
No, just the Japanese,
Well,
just in
that's
our
it.
own country.
Oh.
We interred the Japanese in California. We isolated the Japanese in California
Sure.
during World War II. So just not even the Nazis. Our country was guilty of that.
Sure.
I mean, absolutely. I mean,
But the whole world.
you look back at almost any war, you almost need to do that in order to take the humanity away from those in the perception that you're killing.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the enemy as a human that has the same rights and stuff as you, then it makes it much more difficult to morally fight and kill that person. So in all wars, that's been the objective of both sides, is to dehumanize the other side, put labels or names or whatever
Right.
to them in order to make it easier to conquer, to kill, to whatever. And I think that's been universal throughout all of history.
Yeah.
But racism has been around since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
This is not new. It's something that just started in the 1800s or the 1600s or whenever. It's been since the beginning of time. Look, the Egyptians were racist people. I mean, even in the Bible, Jesus talked about do not be racist. I mean, the whole thing with Peter and the different animals and things like that was about racism. It was not about the different things. It was about racism. Do not separate the people. You know, they're all my people. Don't do that. So
Yeah.
we've had this problem ever since Jesus and Peter and Paul and the apostles. This is
Yeah.
not a new issue.
Well, it's the same, exactly, because of the same thing I was talking about, just like the two rats. Division is Satan's way of distraction.
But everyone's trying to think that the world is trying to bring it up as
That's what it is.
systemic. Well, no, it's not systemic. It's just a part of life. It's a part of human nature, because they focus on the wrong thing. You know, they're trying to make a blame game so that they can divide and try to make who's superior. And they don't want to do whatever. I mean, they don't want to call
Well,
it what it is.
And it seems like
It's
today that...
godless. I mean, the world has gone godless.
Oh,
is
absolutely.
What it is.
It seems like today, once you bring any label that is terrible into the minds of society, people want to take advantage of that and label everything that way in order to demonize everything.
Yeah, yeah. And to me, what's scary about it is because this can very well be a prelude to a dictatorship here in this country. I mean, you know, this kind of thing is what people use that know about it to start these kind of things, to start these socialist revolutions, you know. Now, go back a little bit to what you were saying about what cures this. I don't know if we really answered that too well. What I'd say personally, it's the love of Christ. It's Christ's love in our hearts, and it's not you know, some people's view of God that Christ is a dictator, because that just reinforces the wrong view, you know. But if Christ is the kind of person that will be crying as the people that are lost are being destroyed from the walls of the New Jerusalem, I mean, you know, that's a winning, to me, that's a very winning picture, you know. I mean, Christ doesn't want to lose anybody, no matter who they are. Christ says in this very book that we've been studying here, Matthew, you know, a little bit earlier, I think it's chapter 5, around verse 48, you know, love your enemies. I mean, don't just love your friends or the people that you agree with, but love your enemies. Now that takes some supernatural help, doesn't it?
Well, Spirit of Prophecy says that this can be a true saying of the majority of God's professed people, that I'm changed in theory and doctrine, but I'm not changed in character. And we are told also that the greatest of all miracles is a change of heart. And so it's one thing to do away with certain bad habits. You know, you can make up anything. Well, I quit smoking, or I quit drinking, right? Or I quit stealing. But have I had a change of heart? Have I had a change of mind? Just like, you know, talking about the prejudices. I'm telling you, a change of heart is not easy. We can have all these theories about we need Jesus and all that stuff, and that is what we need. But what is the practical application of that? How can I get that help from Jesus? How can I really be changed in heart and mind? You know, anybody can put on a show. You know what I'm saying? They can put on a show and quit saying anything bad about another race when they're in certain people's presence. Just like the disciples, whenever Christ went to Samaria, you know, she said they kept their mouths shut and pretended to go along with what Jesus was doing with the Samaritans, and they stayed there with him for 2 or 3 days, and they kept their prejudices to themselves. But she said they were still there. They still had that animosity against them. They still had that dislike against them. They still thought that they were superior than they were. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
so we can put on a show and outwardly be correct in our actions, but that still doesn't mean I have a change of heart or that I really love that person like I do my own self.
Yeah.
And that is not easy to do. I don't care what anybody says. To have a change of heart, a real change of heart, and be a different person and love the things that you once hated and hate the things that you once loved, that is not easy.
Well, for a human, it's impossible. I mean, that requires a supernatural intervention. But in the same direction that you were talking about, to love your enemies does not mean to tolerate them. And what an enemy is anyone that's disagreeable to you, right? That's what an enemy is. Whether the level of disagreement varies, but that's what we call an enemy, is someone that we don't agree with. To tolerate that, eventually your buttons will be pushed strong enough to where tolerance will go away. With love, that won't happen, right?
Yeah.
And I think many people today want to say they love their enemies, but in reality, it's more just a tolerance.
Yeah. You know something, what's helped me some in the past is, I heard a pastor say one time, and I've tried it, and it's helped me, is I start praying for somebody I don't like. I mean, if you do it long enough, I mean, people, get conditioned after a while. I think it helps, to be conditioned a little bit to make the groove run a little bit deeper in your brain, I mean, so I would suggest, I would throw that out to you. If you have a person that you have a hard time liking, I mean, start praying for them and see if there doesn't any kind of change come, But anyway, let's go over to Sunday. Somebody read for me Matthew 11, 28 through 30. You go ahead.
Matthew 11, 28 to 30, okay. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Yeah, thank you. Something that, while I was studying this week, I remember back to being on my grandparents' farm when I was a young teenager. We go up for the summer, and work on the farm. And let me tell you something. My grandparents used to say that if they were glad they were Adventists, because if it wasn't for Sabbath, they'd be working 7 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day. I mean, that's. I don't know what you think about that. I mean, so I guess you could look at this as being somewhat physical rest, but when I thought about this text, I mean, do you really think about physical rest, or do you think about mental? I think more what Christ is talking about maybe had something to do with our minds, right?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm saying this the right way, but when you just say rest, I think that I would agree with when you're thinking physical rest. But I think in my mind, the word that would make more of an impression upon me is restlessness. And that would, in my mind, would kind of mean to me that there's just a dissatisfaction.
Yeah. I mean, because sin brings shame and guilt, And I think that's the kind of rest that Christ is talking about here, that he's offering, which is worth a lot more than just physical rest.
I think more of peace.
Go ahead. What'd you say?
I said I think more of peace than rest.
Yeah. So.
When it comes to this verse, I think more of peace than rest.
Yeah.
I mean, what separates the Christian from the non-Christian in this world, really? I mean, we go through the same troubles. We go through the same toils. The lifespan is fairly similar. Some people's habits may give them a little bit of time, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not really much of importance, is it? The difference is the way we look at hope. You know, our lives go by quickly. What do we have to look forward to? If you don't believe in God,
Not much to look forward to, is
I
there?
mean,
Yeah.
you're looking forward to maybe the remembrance of what you've done in others, but what does that matter to yourself as such, right? You know what I'm saying? That your legacy, I guess they call it. But that doesn't really do much, does it? What matters is, in the Christian, that we have a hope that makes this life look temporary, meaningless, and really, you know, as something that will be forgotten, but yet a great future that's coming that will be eternal. That changes the entire perspective on walking the troubles that we're in, because it makes it makes it seem more temporary, which makes it lighter, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about this at camp. I mean, we were looking at, I pointed out, looking at nature. The world wants us to believe we should take care of this planet for our own benefit and for our children's benefits. A selfish motivation, right? If we don't do this, we're going to suffer consequences. Our children will suffer consequences. That's self-centered reasoning.
Yeah.
That won't win too many people's hearts, will it? As Christians, we should look at nature and say, we want to take care of this because it's God's. Period.
Yeah.
That's no longer about us. No longer about me. It's about taking care of something that's important to Him. It's a huge, huge difference. And that's really what we're talking about. The difference between hope and fear.
You know, and thinking about how we get this rest, have you ever thought about that? I mean, why do doctors put their fingers where it hurts? When they think you got appendicitis, where do they put their fingers?
To confirm it.
Yeah, I mean, that hurts, doesn't it? When they press on that place where your appendix is, you know, and it's inflamed, right? I mean, why do they do that?
Well, in that case, to get a diagnosis.
And think about this, you know, it was when Jesus spoke to people here on this earth, especially in this Sermon on the Mount that we're close to here. I mean, I think he was speaking in ways to draw attention to where the problem was. Yeah? What's the first step in saving a sinner?
Well, I mean, in reality, we love Him because He first loved us. So pointing them to Jesus in some way, whichever way gets to Him, and that's why we've got 4 different Gospels, because they give different perspectives on how to look, you know, perceive Him depending on the personality.
That's true. Now that's the first thing. But let me ask this way: what's the first step for the sinner? What's the first thing they must do?
The admission of their guilt.
I mean, and just to say it a little differently, isn't that the sinner recognizes their own condition?
Right, same thing.
Go ahead.
Well, another way of putting that is that Christ, when he was accused by different ones, he said that it's not the whole that need a physician, but the sick. So as long as that you feel there's nothing wrong, then it's hard for, you know, you to receive any help. You know, a little analogy of that is of a friend of mine. He was sick and he thought he had the flu, and he never had the flu before. And of course, he didn't have coronavirus. That wasn't what was wrong with him. And his daughter kept telling him, "You are very sick. You need to go to the hospital." "No, I'm fine. I'll be fine in a couple of days." He kept saying that. And then he got down pretty close to death. So he finally allowed his daughter to take him to the hospital. And the first thing they did is they found out that his blood sugar was 500. And then he had numerous things wrong with him, you know, blocked up arteries in his heart and all kinds of things. So he was pretty close to death, you know. And so had he not done something, but he was against that. Back to the analogy. I'm fine. There's nothing really wrong with me. I'm okay. I'll be fine in a day or two. And it almost cost him his life.
Yes, because, you know, part of this thing about recognizing our own problems, I mean, that's the first step for the sinner themselves that they have to do. We have to recognize our own problem, and then we also have to be convinced that we ourselves can't fix it. You know, because he's figured, well, if I just change my life a little bit, you know, and quit eating this or eating that, and lose a little weight or something like that, then I'll be okay. And see, and then we have to convince them, I think what you were talking about at first, that there's a Savior that can remedy
But see,
this condition.
of course, Satan turns that around, and the world, you know, Jesus said he's not of this world, so we're talking of the world being under Satan's domain. He tries to tell you, yeah, you have a problem, and they caused it. Right? That's the entire worldview that, you know, we see over and over and over again. Yeah, you got a problem. Live off of feelings, and when you feel bad, look who caused it. It wasn't you. It was your circumstances. It wasn't you. It was the people that created those circumstances. That also, if you take that perspective, makes it very difficult to bring Christ into the equation and to win them. Because if I'm not culpable and I didn't do this, then why do I need him?
You know, before this passage that we read, Jesus said to the Jewish people standing there, I say to you that it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for you. Remember that? I mean, think about that. I mean, some Bibles say bearable. That might be a little easier to understand, I think. What does that mean? What is Jesus talking about here, do you think?
Well, I can't answer that specifically because it might not be what you're asking, but the greater a person's light that they have rejected, the worse condition that they can possibly be in. Those in Sodom, relatively speaking, had very little light. Okay? These people had an accumulation of light for centuries, right? And as they continued to reject it, their families and so on, and as individuals, and they just kept doing that, their condition became almost hopeless.
Well, I mean, it's talking about he did miracles and they did not repent in the cities that he did them. The miracles mostly were healings, right? He made them better. There was probably a lot of these cases where their lifestyle caused the very thing that he had to heal them from. And he said they did not repent, which means acknowledging that they caused their own problem. So if you don't repent, what does he call it? It's a dog returning back to his own vomit. The very thing he healed them from, they'll go right back to and cause the exact same disease or whatever it was to come back on them again. And he won't be around the next time, you know, because his mission was short, to heal them. So they'll be worse off, and they're doing the exact same thing I was talking about. They're not taking responsibility for what happened in their lives. They're trying to, in a way, say it wasn't my fault, it wasn't my circumstances, therefore I don't need to change my behavior.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I hadn't thought about that, but that's true too. What I was thinking about was, I think that people who've had more light and are lost on that day of judgment will have a bigger guilt. I think that's another thing that Jesus is talking about here. Because you think about what a burden that would be. I had this chance. I had multiple chances. Some of these folks, there was Jesus himself right in front of me. What greater chance was there than that? And yet I rejected it, you know? I mean, but, you know, when people...
Well,
hear,
I think that comes down to, of course, all sinners will be destroyed, but I think they will feel worse because they will know, I had a chance. I acknowledge now he's the king of the universe because it says all knees will bow. But I can't imagine that heart-sinking feeling to know that I rejected it not once, but twice and had that chance. That's got to just tear the hearts of these people apart compared to ones that didn't know. And I think that's more consequences of your own actions and the
Yeah.
guilt that follows it will be more tormenting, and probably the real torment more, it's, people got this bad idea that God's going to create the torment. I think the sinner will torment themselves in agony, realizing what they gave up.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine. Can you?
No, thinking about on Mondays, we're on this text still about Matthew 11:28 through 30. Let me read to you Barclay's translation. He translated it, "Come to me, all you who are exhausted and weighted down beneath your burden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." You think about, here Jesus giving this sermon. What kind of people, spiritually speaking, was he talking to here? Just in general. Don't you think that, you think about what it meant for a Jew to be religious, for a Jew to be righteous. You think about all the rules and regulations that person had to go through,
Well,
And I think
it's not that as much as I think that even like today, the mindset had been pushed that God was out to get them. That's why you had to do all these things, right? So there was this great burden that there was a almighty God that if you misstepped would punish you for every little thing. So you had to make sure that you followed every rule to the letter so that wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
That we still have a lot of that belief today, just prevalent in the world.
Well, sure, amongst Adventists especially, think about somebody trying desperately to be good through behavior. By it's what I do or what I don't do, and they make up lists, and don't do this on Sabbath, don't do that on Sabbath, just on and on, it sounds like the Jews, what happens eventually, I think, is that these people are driven to despair and they'll either reject religion or maybe God's grace, they'll come back, but it's an impossible task is what I'm saying. What they've set themselves on an impossible task.
Well, that's what happens when they mixed idolatry with, the Jewish religion, because idolatry, that's the whole idea is you appease an angry God. So that ideology ended up getting blended into their beliefs in worship, that it was an appeasement that was needed, not a love.
Yeah. There's a parable in Jewish literature I was going to share with you guys. There was a poor widow who had 2 daughters in a field. When she began to plow, Moses, and that means what they mean there is the law of Moses, said, "You must not plow with an ox and an ass together." When she began to sow, Moses said, "You must not sow your field with mingled seed." When she began to reap and make stacks of corn, he said, "When you reap your harvest in your field and have forgotten a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back and get it." That's Deuteronomy 24:19. "And you shall not reap your field to its very border." So the lady began to thresh, and she said, or thresh the corn, and said, "Give me the law of Moses said, 'Give me the heave offering and the first and the second tithe.' She accepted the ordinance and gave them all to him." Well, what did the poor woman then do? She sold her field and bought 2 sheep to clothe herself from their fleece and to have profit from their young. And when they bore their young, a priest came and said, "Give me the firstborn." So she accepted the decision and gave them to him. When the shearing time came and she sheared them, a priest came and said, "Give me the first of the fleece of the sheep." And that doesn't mean just the first fleece that came off, but it means the best of the fleece that came off. Then she thought, I cannot stand up against this man. I will slaughter the sheep and eat them. Then a priest came and said, give me the shoulder and 2 cheeks and the stomach. Then she said, even when I have killed them, I am not safe from you. Behold, they shall be devoted. Going to dedicate them to God or something like that and try to get around this, you know. Then another priest said, in that case, they belong entirely to me. He took them and went away and left her weeping with her 2 daughters. You can see, I mean, a lot of these demands, there were a lot of burdens. There were some people that could get desperate and wonder, you know, what's going to happen? How can I ever be good? How can I ever be good? Can I ever do enough to be good? You know? And see, that's impossible, like you're shaking your head, you know? You know, now when Jesus said, my yoke is easy, the idea behind that is it's not just easy like we think about it, but it also could be translated. I mean, my yoke fits very well. And you think about it, you know, there's something interesting too. Another thing, there's a legend in Jewish literature that says that Jesus and his father made ox yokes, and they were famous for them, and people came from all here and there to come and get ox yokes made by Jesus and his father.
Well, I think also the idea, he's not fighting against us, pulling the, you know, trying to keep us from moving. He's actually in the yoke with us, putting forth most of the actual work. Not that we're not there pulling, but he is,
Well,
he's the majority of, that's why he makes it easy for us. He's doing most of the pulling, but he's not taking it away completely. We have to walk with him.
yeah. Well, you know, I thought it was interesting that it's possible when Jesus said that these yokes fit well. I mean, he could have been bringing up an example from his adolescence, you know, from his personal experience. Yeah, but okay, going back to what you're saying, Robert. I mean, what is it? So, what is a yoke? What does it do? Is it like a bit?
No, it's
No.
a thing that binds 2 animals together.
It puts the 2 together, but what does it accomplish?
Well, it divides the burden between them.
Do I know?
It's dividing the burden between them, the pulling power.
Yeah, it shares the burden, right? And you know what's interesting is that back in Jesus' day, these yokes were custom made. You know, they were made for the individual ox and fitted exactly and adjusted and everything and fitted exactly to that animal, you know, so that it would work just like that. And Jesus is saying that we're to yoke up with him, like what you're talking about before, you know, and he'll help us carry the load.
But
Have you
see-
ever carried what seemed like an unbearable burden?
But see, well, like we were talking about before, they believed that they were fighting against God in everything they did,
Yeah.
right? Jesus is saying, no, you're not fighting against God. He's walking with you. He's helping you. It's a big difference. You know, if he's out to get you and you've got to, you know, take every little step to avoid catastrophe, that's a whole different picture than he's sitting there, you know, actually pulling the burden and making it easy for you to do it through actually helping.
Yeah, you know something. I've heard for years, most of my life, pastors would say, "Well, you know, give your problems to the Lord. You've got to give your problems to the Lord," and that's true. But you know, I never really realized what it meant until in the year before my mom passed away. And I tell you, it was that experience that helped me understand what that meant. And I've gotten more peace from that. And you know, studying this week though, I was thinking, I wonder if I hadn't been backsliding a little bit lately. I need to get more in touch with God and tune up a little bit, you know? It's something that we need to, that constant contact with God, you know, close contact with God, we need to be able to really lay our burdens upon him so that this guilt and worry doesn't press us down. I mean, I come from a family of worriers. My mom and her mother, I tell you what, if they didn't have something to worry about, they'd make it up. You know, I mean, you gotta, I don't know if any of you are like that, but I tell you what, it's some people almost, it seems like if they're not worrying, there's something wrong. Yeah.
Well, isn't this exactly what Jesus did? He said he did nothing of himself. He laid all it, I mean, he had huge burdens. He fought a fight unlike any fight we're ever going to fight living as a human on this world, right?
Yeah.
And he put all of his burdens on his Father, right?
Yeah.
He submitted to death, right?
Yeah.
So he is not telling us anything more than what he experienced himself.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, a little bit later on in the lesson, you know, it talks about Galatians 6, you know, in the first few verses in there, you know, about bearing each other's burdens, you know. And it says there we're supposed to bear each other's burdens and thus fulfill the law of Christ. Is bearing people's burdens an option for a Christian? No. I don't think so. Not the way it says it. Now, that doesn't mean that you should go around church and tell everybody what your problems are. No. Excuse me. But there ought to be at least 2 or 3 people in church that you feel comfortable enough with so that you could share your burdens and that would help you with your burdens, you know? I mean, think about it. Am I the kind of person that somebody else would want to share their burden with? What kind of person would a person be that somebody else would want to share, would feel comfortable sharing their burden with them? Well, I mean, one of the things is you got to be the kind of person that is expense. Sabbath school expense, I think. Yeah. You have to be the kind of person that if that person's going to share their burden with you, that they're convinced that it's not going to go all around the church. That you're not going to go and tell other people, right? I mean, because like some of these things are embarrassing, you know, and you want to be able to trust that person, not to go tell everybody else what your burden is. You know, am I that kind of person that somebody else would feel comfortable in sharing their burden with me? You know, the other thing is, another thing is that we have to be the kind of people that will listen. Now that might not sound like much. But you know, a lot of times it's hard for us not to jump in as, well, you know, that doesn't amount to much. I know how to take care of that problem, you know. I mean, and pretty soon you make the first person feel about 2 inches tall, you know. I mean, you think about what psychoanalysts do. I mean, they spend most of the time with their patients, especially at first, in listening to what they have to say. Because, see, the goal is eventually to get that person to recognize their problem. Remember, like we were talking about earlier, to recognize it and admit that they have it. That's one of the biggest things that these analysts are trying to do, is to try to get the person to realize what their problem is. But, I mean, if you're going to share other people's burdens, you say, well, I can't do that. I'm not a trained analyst. Well, how many of us are there that couldn't listen to somebody else's problem and not be judgmental about it? Is it close to time?
You got about 15 minutes.
50, okay.
Well, I mean, in a way, it's kind of a shame that we would even have an environment in a church where we'd be worried about other people knowing our burdens, in a sense, because it should be a place where we uplift each other, and not. The only time it's a place where we're condemning each other is when it becomes self-centered, right? When we get self-centered, we want to make ourselves seem better than the next person. So when you find out somebody else has a problem, you want to point out that problem to make yourself look better. That shouldn't be the environment that we have. And we should, if we have a church, Jesus said that they will know you if you love one another. If that truly exists in a church, I don't think that we would be feeling that we would be worried that somebody might tell other people our burdens, because I don't think we'd mind if they knew, because we know they would be there to all uplift and help each other and not condemn.
Well, see, that's yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, we all should be that kind of person, right?
It's a shame we and I think universally, I think we all think that that's not the reality right now.
Yeah.
Therefore, we hide our burdens. right?
Yeah.
I think that's universal probably almost everywhere. It's a shame it's that way.
You know, something else about this passage, and I tell you what, yeah, this is an awfully good passage. You know, I preached a sermon at our church one time about this passage in Galatians. You know, you go on to verse 4, I think it is, and it says, "But each person must carry their own load." Think about that. You know, I mean, I had a good friend who was an analyst, quite a bit older than me. You know, as a matter of fact, she was PhD in psychology, and she taught psychology. But you know, something I noticed about her as I got older was that most of her patients, a lot of them anyway, maybe not most of them, but a lot of them were still dependent on her for years. You know, and I think the whole purpose of bearing somebody else's burden is to help them get out from under it and put it on and share it with God and stand up with God and them by themselves instead of with our help anymore. Is to get them away from our help, you know, shouldn't it? And you know, that's hard to do sometimes because it feels really good to play God in somebody else's life. That's something else you have to watch out for if you're going to share somebody else's burden with them. Yeah. Anyway, you know, I think people can have the same problems that they have in sharing their burdens with other people and sharing them with God. It's because they don't trust God. That's why they don't want to share their burdens with Him. Yeah.
Well, I would think that in order to be that way, you would almost have to feel that God really doesn't know it. What's the point in hiding something from Him that He already knows, right?
Yeah.
So, and of course, you see this in the beginning, but people, when they sin, do have a feeling that God doesn't know. That's why they do it, because they think He's not watching.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of a bizarre thought, isn't it? It's kind of narcissistic to think, oh, I can do something that God doesn't know about. If I believe in Him and I think He's all knowing and all creative and everything, why would I think that I actually could hide from Him?
Yeah.
And how in the world would I think that if I could and do that without His knowledge, that it would benefit me? Because, I mean, how many people do things that they don't think in some twisted way is benefiting them?
Yeah. You know something? I mean, you're right. All those things you said, you're right. You know, that yoke that joins us to Christ, I mean, it's love. It's love for God, but very important, and almost just as important, is love for our fellow human beings. Because you point out somebody that says they love God, and yet they don't like people. They don't like God. They really don't like God. Because, let me tell you, they have a wrong picture of God, because people that truly love God also love other people. You know? Here, from Desire of Ages, Ellen White says, "The yoke that binds to service is the law of God, the great law of love revealed in Eden." Then a little bit further down it says, "Love for God, zeal for His glory, and love for fallen humanity brought Jesus to earth to suffer and die. This was the controlling power of His life, the principle that He bids us to adopt." Desire of Ages, page 329, paragraph 3. This is design law. This is how Jesus designed life to operate, based on these principles. Yeah. And we can't go through life, you know, allowing other people to solve our problems. Each person must bear their own load, like Paul says in Galatians chapter 6. You know, I mean, if we allow other people to fulfill our duties or to solve our problems, it's bad for our health, it's bad for our wellness, for our development, and we need to unite with Christ in carrying out these responsibilities. wellness, spiritual well-being, depends on, being responsible. Being responsible human beings, like I've heard before. I had a friend of mine say one time, some years back, well, it doesn't matter who I vote for because, God raises them up and puts them down, blessed be the name of the Lord. We are responsible for everything that we do. You think about it, And people voted Hitler into power. They put him into power through votes, through their own votes. And I don't think that was God's will that Hitler came to power. I don't think he raised up Hitler. I mean, he didn't raise up Saul. You think about it. It wasn't God's will for them to have a king. Saul, now he pointed out and said that was, I guess, the best choice that was available. But that was never his will for them.
It goes back to sin, period.
Yeah,
He created Lucifer, which is Satan. He didn't create him to sin and cause this. He created him to love, which means free will.
yeah,
And he made a way out if this happened. Right? Because of his love.
yeah,
So he doesn't want the suffering or any bad thing to happen to anyone. Right?
yeah,
He gets no pleasure in it. And he will make a way out. So, in a sense, yeah, he created Lucifer, but he didn't create the sin. We are all created by God. And so Hitler was created by God, but he didn't make him choose the things he chose and bring that power up, right?
yeah,
He allowed it. And he can bring good out of it, as messed up as it is. Because if he can bring good out of this, sin and save people out of it, then he can do it from any circumstance. Because, we give these examples like that as though they're the worst, but the worst is just the whole thing. That Jesus had to die on the cross, that's as worse as it gets. That's hard to contemplate, but he, the God of the universe doing that, that's hard to understand.
yeah, yeah. Okay, well, anyway, let's think about, where they were talking about meekness in the lesson. What's meekness the opposite of? You thought about that?
Pride.
Yeah, pride. Yeah, arrogance, pride, But, something that was interesting I thought was pretty good in the lesson, They point out that the meek are not doormats. Did you notice that? I mean, what does that mean?
I mean, wasn't Jesus about as meek as it gets, but he's the king of the universe?
Yeah, and Jesus stood up for the right, didn't he? But like I said the last time I was here, 2 weeks ago when I was teaching the lesson, you notice how Jesus corrected or said things. He didn't single out individuals and say, "You, Robert, are doing this and it's wrong," or "You, John." He didn't do it that way. No, what he did was he took actions or things that were happening, and then he showed why they were wrong. Yeah.
I was talking to somebody the other day, and you will never convince somebody that something's a lie just by saying that's a lie. No matter how many times you say it, you will never convince someone that it is. The only way you can convince someone that something is a lie is to show them the truth. You don't have, and at that point, you don't point out what they believed before was a lie. You just show them the truth. That's what Jesus did, right?
Yeah.
So, pointing fingers and saying this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, that won't solve the problem or convince people. But standing up for what is right and showing God in it will convince people, because that'll change the heart.
Yeah, and in the book Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, I don't know if any of you guys have ever read that. That's a terrible book. I mean, that's one of the worst books that's ever been written, I think. And I mean, where he's talking about how to deal with your opposition. What you do is you isolate them, then you smear them personally. You know? I mean, you know, that book in the front, in the dedication, is dedicated to Lucifer, the first rebel. You know? But a lot of people follow that. People teach that, teach the things that are in it, you know. Something else. One day, like many years ago, I was on that same farm I was talking about earlier, my grandparents' farm up in Virginia, and my grandfather, he was older then. He'd lay down on the couch for about 40 minutes or so after dinner and take a nap before we went back out to work. Well, anyway, I was doing something one day, and all of a sudden I heard this big kabam! You know, something dropped on the floor. And I ran in there to where he was on the couch, and there was my grandmother standing over him with a broom, and she'd knocked him off the couch. It took a while. I didn't ask right away, but I found out later that she'd been out sweeping the kitchen, and she'd thought about something that he'd done a week ago and gotten so mad about it while she was sweeping the kitchen that she'd come in there and knocked him off the couch. Now, when she knocked him off the couch, do you think that would have been a good time for him not to be a doormat? Probably not, right? So, I mean, we have to, when it talks about not being a doormat, you know, we have to take some of these things with a grain of salt, be wise about them, you know. You know, they say that when you're doing customer service with people that are upset, the first thing is you don't disagree with them, because that's just going to make them madder and madder, you know, right off the bat. You have to kind of try to win them around, you know, to something. But anyway, just compromising so somebody else won't get mad, I mean, that's really, I mean, I think that shows, if we do that too often, it can show that we ourselves are in need of other people's approval. In other words, we can't stand up for what's right, you know. I think the truth in love, like Paul says, you know. And if you need to go and wash somebody else's feet before you can tell them the truth, then that's what you need to do. But it needs to be the truth, but it needs to be in love, you know, and you hope that that person perceives you as loving. That's the, and we hope that, like I say, when we disagree with each other in church or in Sabbath school, that we can all be friends afterwards. That's the Christ-like thing, I think, because there's no way that we're going to have, that's not real unity, I don't think, you know, that we are in lockstep with each other and we believe everything that everybody else does, you know, about everything. We have a unity of love and fellowship, not a unity of believing exactly the same thing about everything, you know. Well, you know, think about this, and this is something maybe I want to close up with. You know, what does it really mean to love another person? People talk a lot about love, you know. There's a lot about love on TV, you know, a lot about love in movies, you know. We talk about it in church frequently. What does it mean what does it mean to really love somebody? What is real love like?
I mean, one way you could put it out is to not have ill feelings when you have a disagreement. Because that's really where things go when people don't love. I mean, you can go into the different forms of love, whether it's emotional, whether you want to be around them and all that stuff. But, you know, it's really when you have a type of disagreement that's tested. And it's how you respond to that disagreement shows whether you have love or not. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah. You know, if you're out hiking, for instance, with your spouse, and he or she falls and breaks their leg, well, I mean, it's going to take a lot of physical therapy afterwards, and some of it's not, a lot of it, especially at first, is going to be pretty difficult, physical therapy. I mean, would it be an act of love for you to do his or her exercises for them?
Wouldn't help them much, would
Yeah, it wouldn't help them much, would it, you know? And yet, that's what parents do for their children a lot of times. Go ahead.
Well, it's just kind of a simple analogy, but I'll just make up something like, for instance, if he breaks down on the side of the road somewhere and he has my telephone number and he calls me up and maybe I'm some expert car mechanic or something, okay? And he says, hey, I'm over here broke down, and he tells me what has happened. And I tell him, well, hope things turn out okay. I'll be praying for you. Then I hang up. Okay, so did I love my neighbor as myself, or should I have treated him the way I'd want to be treated? What did he call me for? He wanted me to come help him. Okay? So if I said, well, I'll pray for you, I hope it turns out all right, but I have the ability to help him, and I just refuse to, then I didn't love him, did I? I didn't want to be bothered up with him because it was too much inconvenience, or maybe I was watching my favorite TV show, or who knows what.
Yeah. See, what if somebody has a broken heart, you know, and when you try to help that person, or you try to say something, say the right thing, that person gets angry and starts attacking you, you know? Is it love to accept their accusation and then apologize for trying to help? I mean, I think something to think about is that once there's brokenness, there are no pain-free options. Once there's some kind of brokenness, there are no pain-free options, you know. The path of love to bring healing, even through the healing interventions, like where you try to intervene in something like this, or to help bring Christ into their life, a lot of times these interventions are painful. It's something to think about, you know, when we're trying to bear other people's burdens, like Paul says that we should. You know? So love doesn't act by doing what feels best, but by what is best.
Well, I guess, in a way, the thought came to me as you were summarizing with this. In order to love, there is a cost that I must bear. Jesus showed the greatest love of all, but he had a huge cost in doing that, didn't he?
Yeah.
So I think that's getting around to. There's pain. That pain, there's a cost to solving that with that pain, no matter what it is. You know, it's different for every situation, but there is a cost.
Yeah, you know.
And to love means I'm willing to bear that cost, right?
Yep, that's right.
That's why, you know, the Spirit of Prophecy uses the phrase self-sacrificing love, and that's what he's talking about. A lot of people will do something for someone if there's little or no inconvenience involved in it. I mean, is that not true?
Yeah.
But we have to learn, what does it mean? What does the phrase self-sacrificing love mean? It means to inconvenience yourself, or maybe even bring suffering upon yourself,
Well,
to help somebody that's in a worse situation than you're in.
well, that's why Jesus says there's no greater love than one that gives their life for another. Well, what greater cost is there to an individual other than their lives? Right?
Yeah. You know, have you ever thought about, I mean, what happens when we love an organization more than we love people? You ever thought about that? I mean, that happens.
Well, someone will be taken advantage of.
That's right. I mean, sometimes the people are going to be taken advantage of. I mean, we know an organization here, not Adventists, I'm not talking about Adventists, that has sheltered child molesters rather than help the people that need help. You know? I mean, the organization is more important than the people. But I've seen it in our church too. Sometimes with some people, the organization is more important than the people. Just to close it up, and we could talk about this for a while, but I tell you personally, I think no organization is more important than the people. People are what's important, you know? I mean, you think about divorce in the New Testament, you know? Christ said, because of the hardness of your heart, that you could do these things, you know? I mean, when somebody insists on doing what's wrong or insists on going the wrong way, all God does, he lets them go. He doesn't say, "Zzz, your history," you know, or something like that. We ought to treat people the same way. If it comes to a point where they're not going to listen and they're going to do their own thing no matter what can you do but let them go? That's what God does. Now, you're always there, and like God, and you always try to put in a word if it ever can happen down the road. Like God sends his Holy, I don't think God takes away his Holy Spirit. You know, it's just that person might get to the place where they can't hear the Holy Spirit because of their own, the way they've conditioned their own minds. But anyway, something to think about, man. I tell you, people are more important than the organization. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Our loving Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for these lessons. Be with us, each one, as we study. Impress on our minds what you would have us to know. Help us to say the right thing that represents you the right way. That our own lives might be heavy with influence for the good with the people that we're going to go out and meet this week. Finally, save us all for your kingdom. In Christ's name we ask it for his sake. Amen.